Joining me today is Danny O'Connor. His new book is Weight Class, a fighter's life or death battle with an eating disorder. Former Olympic boxer and professional champion Danny O'Connor delivers a searing, deeply personal memoir that confronts one of sport's most overlooked crises: eating disorders in male athletes. From high school wrestling to the 2008 U.S. Olympic boxing team and a decade long professional career, O'Connor lived in a world where extreme weight cutting, starvation, dehydration, purging, and physical collapse was common practice. What began as discipline slowly became self destruction, culminating in a public failure to make weight for a world title fight and a private medical emergency that nearly cost him his life. He turned professional in 2008 and competed at the highest levels of the sport for more than a decade. He compiled a professional record of 31 wins. Over the course of his career, he fought on major televised platforms, which includes ESPN, Showtime, CBS Sports, and Fox Sports 1, and competed in prominent venues across the United States. Welcome to the show, Danny. Nice to have you on.
Hi, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, this is a groundbreaking book. And I'm making that assumption because I think one of the, I guess, cultural sort of attitudes that we have towards men, that real men don't get eating disorders. It's a woman's problem. And as you've written in your memoir, that's not true.
Yeah, that's definitely not true. I mean, they have, the National Eating Disorder Association, they have national stats that are reporting that, roughly 10 million men are affected. And as you know, adults can mask symptoms. So the way I look at it, a lot of those statistics are coming from children. And I do think that this is groundbreaking. I didn't just try to write a book. I was trying to make a cultural impact where something that's never been talked about before, something that, there could be 10 million people suffering in silence with no support, no connection. Like I found out trying to recover from it, that there has to be more awareness and severity. So that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to start this conversation and shed some light on a population of people. And there's two parallels here in my life. Like, boxing is a sport that absolutely saved my life in a time when my life needed saving. I would say that my childhood, not even encompassing the eating disorder, is a book in itself. But the reality is, you can compete in a weight class sport without an eating disorder and never develop one. And it's a great sport. It did a lot of things for me. It's just I didn't maintain the correct habits. I didn't do the things that a healthy person would do to make my weight. I manipulated my body in different ways that put my life at risk numerous times throughout my whole career.
I want to
And
stop
I
you there because I want
normalized
to I
that.
want to go back, because before we get into that, because as you say, it's an individualized experience that you had. Not everybody has that experience who become professional boxers or in the Olympics. But I think one thing that you said, I just want to make sure we go over this, because men don't report. There's a stigma associated with men and eating disorders, whether you're an athlete or
Yeah.
not. So you have, I'm assuming, and I think it's, as you alluded to, the fact that a lot of researchers and professionals now are saying, there are millions of men out there who aren't getting help because there's a stigma attached. They don't report it, and when they report it, as I understand it, they're sicker usually because they're reporting their symptoms and their medical problems later than, say, women do. So they don't get treated until later. And
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, throughout my 20 years of surviving this eating disorder, this wasn't like a habit, it's something that progressed and developed. So 20 years, I've only spoken to four other men who openly talked about it with me. And so my recovery, which, it wasn't like I just tried a couple of things. I probably tried everything you possibly think of over a 10-year span just to save my life. Even to the point where I went to an intensive outpatient as the only male patient. Like all the patients were females, all the providers were female, and they were amazing. But I never had that male, because listen, this thing was so chaotic that there was a time when I first kind of like realized like, oh my God, I'm in big trouble here. I didn't know what was going on with my body. I
When
had
did you
no
realize
idea
that?
why it
What
was
was
doing things or
yeah.
why it wasn't.
Well, when was that?
2013 is when I
Okay.
realized that.
2013. But what was
2013
happening?
is when I realized that. Yeah. Well, so here's the thing, because I used all these negative tactics in a weight class, which is, whenever you go against the functions of your body, you don't eat when you're hungry, or you eat too much when you're not hungry, or you make yourself go to the bathroom when you shouldn't be going to the bathroom. Whenever you mess with systems of the body, there's some serious repercussions that can happen. And ultimately, eating disorders do that a lot. And so there's a lot of repercussions that can happen. And so when I fit my body into a weight class, I was doing things like starving myself and manipulating fluids in my body to fit in this weight, which was to a very extreme discipline, right? It could always be controlled. And then all of a sudden, right, eating disorders didn't happen overnight. It was a progression. I did these things. There was no information or awareness. I didn't know what an eating disorder was. Listen, I'm just some kid from Boston. I grew up middle class. I played sports. Like, I had no idea what an eating disorder could do to you, how it would affect me for 20 years. And I never asked myself, stepping on that scale, like, how is this going to affect me in 10 years? I just thought, I would do these things, deprive my body, do whatever it needs to do to compete and succeed. And then, when my career is over and I've reached those dreams, then I'll just go back to what I view would be normal. I didn't realize that not going back to normal might not be an option. So in 2013, these things that I controlled so much, like manipulation of not eating or eating, they were now out of my control. It wasn't like a willpower where I could stop doing. So I got diagnosed with binge eating. That means I was eating too much, and there was no force on earth that could stop that. And trust me, I had the Boston Garden on the line. It was my livelihood to fight. Like, I had all these things on the line, my health, and I just I couldn't get a grip on it, and it baffled my mind so
what
much
about your
because every
family?
aspect of,
What about your family and your coaches and the people who are surrounding you? Were they aware of it and didn't say anything,
yeah.
or were they too sort of, had the same kind of, it happened, it was insidious and they didn't realize?
Well, I always say that eating disorder is a disorder of loneliness, because throughout my life, my wife has been the absolute most crucial support, and she doesn't have an eating disorder, but she's the one that has been with me. We've been married for 15 years now. So she's seen it from the outside. Whenever something affects me, it affects her too. So she has absolutely been like the crucial support that I've had. And outside my professional staff, like the medical doctors, the psychiatrists, the doctors of psychology, I've seen so many professionals to like um, help my support and, dealing with this eating disorder. Outside of those people, nobody in the world knew anything about what I was doing. Like, and now when you find out, right, because I didn't even just come out and tell my family, I just wrote a book and told the whole world because I figured just everyone will know at one time, right? So now when you look back, you'll see a lot of, habits or abnormal eating here or there. And, you probably thought nothing of it, but it really is. Eating disorders are so crazy complex because they're hiding right in plain sight. But nobody in this world, no coach, no parent, no friend, nobody could ever know the depth of my disorder outside of my wife, who had to witness it firsthand. So, you know,
Well, you
I think it's
mentioned in the
really
beginning
important
that
that
some
that
kid,
I
you
that
mentioned
I
that
shed light on this.
well, you mentioned in the beginning, and I want to interrupt you on that one. You said, I mean, because of what the nature of the sport that you were doing, the stuffing. I'm saying stuffing and starving. That's not really, but starvation, dehydration, all that. But you said that some kids never develop, or some professionals never boxers develop an eating disorder, and some do, and it's related to their own family situations. I think you said that in the beginning of the interview. So what are the differences?
Well, I don't necessarily know. Well, I don't necessarily know it's related to their family issues. I was talking more along the lines of don't cut weight, right? I was cutting like unimaginable amounts of weight to fit myself into a weight class that shouldn't have been where I was in anyway. So the reality is, I was doing things abnormally when it came to eating and starving and manipulating my body and sweating and taking fluids out. So like those were things that were just strengthening the eating disorder and developing and building. So the way to be a combat athlete is to like be optimal, feed yourself, fuel yourself the best, train as hard as you can, don't cut any weight, just wrestle, compete where you are at the best of your ability. I have never once in my, well, actually, I take that back. One time in my whole life, which was my last boxing match of my life. Other than that, I have never once in my life stepped in the ring to fight another person, sometimes for 12 rounds, at 100% because of the things I was doing behind closed doors to make that weight class. I mean, in 2011, I made myself anemic before I got in the ring, and I got beat up pretty bad, ended up having a total nasal reconstructive surgery. So, like, you can't do the things to your body that I was doing and expect that there's not going to be something down the line related to what you were doing, some consequence. And ultimately, a lot of those habits, along with a lot of other predispositions, because that's the thing I want people to understand about eating disorders. Like, there's a lot of different ways to develop one. So if you don't have the same aspects of this one person, there's still another way you can get it. And that's why they're so sneaky and dangerous, because there's just not enough awareness. Like, I didn't get in a weight class because I wanted to get an eating disorder. I got in a weight class because I wanted to wrestle and compete and, be an Olympian and win a world championship belt. And so I had no idea. There wasn't enough awareness. There wasn't enough people talking about it. And I think that really has to change. I mean, it definitely does, because nobody's immune to it. Anybody can be affected, especially children. And that is the biggest thing to me. There's some kid somewhere in the world right now that's stepping onto a scale in a weight class like I was at the age of 13, and he just wants to be a champion. And he's in danger because he just doesn't know. There isn't enough awareness. And so I thought it was essential that I wrote the book to shed light on that.
So you want to shed light. You first of all, the kids. It sounds like the kids, the parents, the coaches. I mean, the schools. I would assume all of this information, your personal story, is going to have an impact on them. And you've written the book. Now, what do you, I'm assuming you're promoting the book and then lecturing at all of these different, let's say, middle school. You mentioned 13-year-olds getting on the scale, and it can be the beginning of an eating disorder.
Yeah. Um, that's the kind of hard question. And I'll tell you the truth. I don't love talking about this stuff. I didn't necessarily want to like be that person that's coming out, but I feel more like it's my responsibility. Like, if I have the ability to reach a platform, there might be 10 million men right now that could probably benefit from that, because I just look back at the journey for 20 years and how lonely it felt because I didn't have that man. So my goal is to talk about it as much as I can till I reach the Joe Rogan podcast, and then everyone can hear. The reason I wanted to write the book was because I didn't want to talk about it. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to write a book, and then anyone that's struggling or needs to like learn or research or whatever, you can just read it. And then what I realized is when you write a book, you got to talk about it even more. So I do like lecturing. I mean, I'm really artsy. So I think like public speaking is pretty cool. I like it more intimate though. Like, I like when I can talk to a small group of people and really give them feedback that's specific, you know what I mean? Instead of a general thing. So I'm not really sure. I just want to, I'm trying to do something next level here, because no one's ever talked about this eating disorder in this way. And I think a lot of people can benefit and a lot of people can save their life from it. So I just want to make sure that I'm unrolling it to the world in a compassionate way, because when you look at my journey, my journey from like start to finish, like it's insane. Every day I pass my wife and when I was reading the book and writing the book, and I'm like, hey, remember this time, man, that was crazy. And then the next day I'm writing about something else. Hey, remember this time? Well, that was like even more crazy. And so like, you know I feel like it's my responsibility. What did I go through all this if I couldn't say it to, that 14-year-old kid that needs to hear it? I needed to hear it, and I didn't know, and I didn't, there just wasn't enough information, and so I think as a society, eating disorders are extremely dangerous. They are life threatening, and I think that they should be treated as such.
Yeah, to go along with what you're saying, it's in mental health disorders. Uh, it is one of the riskiest uh, behaviors for suicide. amongst not just men, but men and women. So it is critical to get that message out.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, eating disorders has the second highest mortality rate out of any mental health illness, only second to opioid addiction. And it's actually crazy because if you actually end up reading the book and you see the different paths I had to take to recovery, I did all your traditional ones. Obviously, there was no males, and then I did all these unorthodox ones because I just didn't know what was going to work, and I was trying to save my life. I knew that stat, and I had read that a while ago, and so I game planned with a heroin addict because the only stat higher on the list than the one that was trying to kill me was the opioids. So I used to brainstorm with somebody that was addicted to heroin, and I would try to like learn, what's going on with you, what's happening with you, like how are you using it, and then I would try to relate it to the eating disorder. And that's something I did a lot. Like I tried to learn other stuff, all the eating disorder stuff, but I also tried to learn other stuff because this thing was just very complex. It like always evolved, and it was really hard to like conjure. And you got to understand, and for everyone right now, listen to this, like any type of addiction, like it doesn't matter, like, gambling or alcohol, drugs, it doesn't matter. You're going to come to a point where you can have abstinence. Like you don't have to do it anymore. In eating disorder, you don't ever have that luxury. Like you have to take what's out of control and then put it back in control because you have to have a relationship with it for the rest of your life. It's a primal need. Like you have to eat to survive. So
yeah. So you
it's
have to
very,
eat,
very
and you have to have a
complex.
different relationship with food, a different relationship with food,
Exactly.
like you're saying. You
Exactly.
don't
There
have to take
there
all
is
the
no
yeah,
abstinence.
yeah. There's no
You
yeah,
can't just quit food. You can't
yeah,
just quit food
right.
because you need to work on recovery. And so it baffled my mind. If it was out of control, if I could get it in control, it wouldn't be out of control, right? I wouldn't, so it's like I just couldn't, it took a greater part of 10 years before I could like really say like, I'm free of an eating disorder. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it was a long journey.
So how did it affect? I mean, you talked about your wife and how supportive she has. You've been married for 15 years, and she's been your support. What about other? How did it affect? And it sounds like it's a positive relationship, but what about with other people? How did it affect your relationship with other people in your family, other intimate, close relationships, having an eating disorder?
It didn't affect anyone in a negative way in the sense like our relationships. Like if anything, it just made us a little bit more distant. Like I could never really truly let anyone in unless they were going to be a part of this eating disorder too, which Diane was obviously because she's my wife and she's a part of it. She was there for these crazy binges where she's cleaning up the vomit. Like, trust me, she's a part of it. She may not be experiencing it and she can't see what's happening on the inside, but every aspect of my life that's taken away, she then either has to, do the extra work, like watch the kids or do whatever. So she's the only one that knew the full grip of it, but like everyone else in this world, they just had no idea. I could in this thing to the grave and died with and no thought twice about it. And that's why I think eating disorders are so sneaky dangerous that it caught me, man. And I look back now and I think about like all the decisions because some of those things I was reinforcing, like I would be 100% strict in the training camp to a T, 100%. Like I would not cheat or do anything, break my discipline, nothing. And then in the in between, I'd eat that pizza, I'd eat that ice cream. I would push those limits. I would binge a little bit, which is not your traditional binge because it's me making the decision to do it. But I look back at all those things where I'm like, wow, like, I had a lot of bad habits around the way that I ate, what I ate, how I treated my body. And I wish I just could have done different, really. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I hope that someone setting out on that path will just do different right off the bat. Like learn from everything that I put in that book, which was pretty hard to write because you got to think like there's so much how that's what I was saying before. When you mess with systems of the body, which eating disorders does, that's all it does. It messes with your mind and your body and everything as a whole being. And when you do that, like you have a lot of health risks. So like,
Yeah, I want to
having to
talk about
do
that
and
because
and
in the
and listen,
intro, I mentioned the private, I
yeah,
think, yeah, a private medical emergency that nearly
yeah,
cost you your life. So what
yeah,
happened?
yeah. Oh man, and this probably is the hardest stuff to talk about is the health stuff. So let me preface with I was a first responder for a decade, so I was part of this heart study in where they have all these special testing, and that was more recent. And I have a primary care that I see where I've remedied a lot of my tests. I get frequent tests so that I know where all levels of everything are, and I treat myself really well now. So like right now, I feel good, but you have to understand it took a long time to get there. So I've turned my skin completely orange before because the binge eating at that time was like full of like pumpkin and sweet potatoes. So the beta carotene essentially turned my whole skin orange because it was such an overload. I've been pre-diabetic multiple times before tests. Before a fight, you have to get like blood tests, and it would catch me after a night of a binge when there was so much sugar and stuff in my body that I'd literally be pre-diabetic. I've had blood in my sperm, which you saying blood, any bodily fluid, is not a good marker. Um, 2011, I was starving so aggressively that I made myself anemic before going in to compete on national TV, Showtime, in front of the whole world. And so that was, I already had a health issue before I even got in the ring to get beat up to get another health issue, because that was the time that I spoke about the broken nose. And then 2018 is really hard because the eating disorder is tough. Like nobody else, like I was the one doing the action. So when I look back, being a world champion in boxing, the WBC, that was my dream. Like that's the Super Bowl, that is the World Series, and it took me 10 years chasing that dream, focused on it every day, the same exact dream. And when I finally got that opportunity and it was time to walk in the ring to achieve that goal, the paramedics took me out of my hotel room because I was essentially dead from the dehydration. They thought that I was going into internal failure for my internal organs. Obviously, that was the weight cut and the extreme dehydration. So I went to the ICU and I did not compete in that fight. I did not get a chance to fight for the world championship belt again. So essentially, it kind of, obviously put a, that's something I have to live with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's something that I have to live with.
I would imagine, I mean, that's a huge loss, right? You have to grieve that loss. It's, I mean, as you said, you've been working towards that,
Yeah,
and then to be able to accept the fact that you just didn't
yeah,
do it.
yeah.
Did that involve
You know what?
therapy?
It was a well, I mean, you're talking to somebody that's talked to more clinicians than,
Yeah.
what I mean? I've talked to every type in the world. And that's another thing. You can't just go to one and think that it's the end of the day. It's like dating. You got to find one that you really like that talks to you. But
Yeah.
I would say, no sport, especially winning a world championship belt, is worth my life. Like being a husband and parent, that's like my whole world. And if I could just stay home every single day and do that, that's what I do. So like that was an opportunity that really opened my eyes to like the stuff I was normalizing that I was doing to myself. Like, no, like this is like you almost died. Like you did die and then you were alive. So like, what are you going to do? You need to make a change. So, I'm okay with the fact that I'm not a world champion. I think the book is more powerful than any like accolade or trophy I can put them. At the end of the day, I don't even really care about that stuff. I've given every trophy or anything I've ever had away to like the PAL program or whatever. But the thing that I do that does make me happy is, listen, I didn't get in the ring, so I didn't lose the fight. Right. So
Yeah.
we don't know. I could have been a world champion. I could have won. I'm really good at fighting. So I like to just live with that shiver of hope of, I don't know if I could have reached my dream or not, but out of that dream, I'm doing something really, really special for the world, I think.
Well, I think this book can make you the world champion. This is what it's all about.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think this is yeah, I think you've done it. You're doing it. But I mean, we only have a couple minutes left, so let's get the information out there because I'm talking to Danny O'Connor and his book
sure.
is Weight Class: A Fighter's Life or Death Battle with an Eating Disorder. So, okay, Danny, websites, platforms to go to for more information about the book and about you and about your work.
Sure. Yeah. You can, I mean, you can buy the book on barnesandnoble.com or Amazon. It's super easy, super fast. Or I have my own website, which is bitelikeaman.com. I thought that was a kind of a, a ploy on words just because
Yeah, I
I'm a
like
man.
that
But
one.
that kind of tells about, yeah, it tells about me, and it's a men's network. Like I created a men's network so that other men could have outlets to connect. So and it also deals with, like, you can book me for speaking and stuff. I do have a lot of speaking engagements, and I know you asked before. I do like doing it. Like it is pretty, like, even writing the book it was one of the hardest things and most challenging things I've ever done in my life, but it was also a very growing experience, being able to deal with everything and look at your life in reverse. So there's a lot of speaking stuff on the website that I do too. But yeah, get a copy. I hope that it can save your life or somebody that you know,
That's great. Get a copy. Thanks so much for being on the show today. This was great. And yeah, good luck with the book. It's going to be a winner. Danny O'Connor, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Joining me today is Mimi Nichter, author of Hostage, a memoir of terrorism, trauma, and resilience. On September 6, 1970, 20-year-old Mimi Nichter, wearing her green mini dress, was returning home on a flight to New York JFK Airport from a summer spent on a kibbutz in Israel when her plane was hijacked by armed members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and redirected to a remote desert region in Jordan. The hijacking of Trans World Airlines Flight 741 was the first incident of international terrorism and one of the most significant events in aviation history. Passengers were held on board for 6 days in sweltering heat without flushable toilets or running water. Most were sent home, but she, falsely accused of being an Israeli soldier, and 31 others were held hostage in Amman, fearing for their lives as a violent war erupted around them. Mimi Nichter is a cultural and medical anthropologist, public speaker, and professional emerita of anthropology at the University of Arizona. Her essays have appeared in HuffPost, Newsweek, and Brevity, and many others. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on today.
Thank you. I'm
All right,
happy to
well,
be here.
Hostage, you decided to write this book 50 years later. I guess the first question is why wait 50 years or why now?
Yeah, those are both good questions. Why now? Well, that's a fascinating and complex answer that I think your listeners will be able to relate to. Women who are my age now, who were, socialized in the 19 and born, grown up in the 1950s and 60s, were not encouraged to tell our stories. I was raised not to talk about myself, not to talk about the family, kind of the seen but not heard sort of upbringing. And certainly people did not talk about trauma. That came much later. Even people, soldiers who returned from war, did not talk about their trauma. They were simply supposed to move on. And my family didn't talk much or ask me many questions about what had happened. And I think why write the book now is this was a story I suppressed for so long. It was very frightening for me to unpack it, and I really compartmentalized it, put it in a box inside, and never wanted to look at it. But as I got older, and certainly as trauma became something we did talk about, and that's certainly been commonplace in our culture for so many years now, I decided that I wanted to look at the experience and the feelings and give voice to what had happened to me as part of a healing journey.
I just want to go back a little because we're talking about the 70s, right? Well, this happened in 1970, but
Correct.
I'm part of your generation, the baby boomers. And as I was reading the book, I'm thinking, but in the 70s, we had the women's movement, people were marching, the Vietnam
Mm-hmm.
War, all of those
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things, and saying,
Yeah.
okay, we are going to speak out. We are going to say something about the socio-political situations. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, coming back and this, I guess, as I read in the intro, it says it was the number one, it was the most I guess it was one of the first hijacking incidences that we had. So I was thinking, well, why didn't she say something? Was it that the other people hadn't had that experience because it was one of the first, so there was nobody to relate really as an individual to it? I mean, would the world not wanted to have hear about it? Yeah, so tell me more about
No,
that.
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't think it was that, Catherine. I think it was really number one. I had been brought up in a family, as I said, where we didn't talk about things. Now, I grew up in a family with a brother who was living with schizophrenia, and we were always told not to talk about him, and just if anyone asked to tell them he was fine. And that had a very big impact on me in terms of really learning how to hide things that didn't seem normal at a very early age. I also think that another reason why I was quiet about the story and just didn't want to talk about it was because when I returned home, as you said, it was a time of beginning to, come out, particularly in the women's movement. However, I found that my friends who were like me, anti-Vietnam War activists, and I was in college in D.C. and we were always demonstrating against the war. So there was a lot of activity, but there was also a naivety among my friends, a romanticization of what had happened to me, as if this was cool or far out. I was with real revolutionaries. And revolutionaries were people that we held up as people who could make radical change. And that's also part of the 70s. And I just saw my friends as so naive that I just, they wanted to hear the story. They wanted to know everything what had happened. And for me, because I was suffering from PTSD, unnamed at that time because it wasn't a concept yet, I just didn't have the ability to talk about it.
And that wasn't the story, as I'm listening to you, that they wanted to hear. They wanted to see you as the, I guess, the heroine, as you described it anyway, somebody who had really been involved in the whole radicalizing situation, but the real gutsy stuff, like you're talking, the trauma, the PTSD, they weren't ready to hear that.
Right.
And, yeah, and you didn't have the support, I guess, either from your family or anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it is, you have to realize that people can be outward in some ways, but even actually, and more reticent in others. But even when I went back to going to, protests on the street after I returned, within a month or so, it just really overwhelmed me, and I couldn't do that anymore.
Let's talk about what really, obviously, that's what the book is about, what really did happen and all the emotions and all the, from initially being hijacked and not really being afraid because you didn't know what to be afraid of, and how the fear and all of that evolved as you were there for 21 days, the whole event. So, here I was struck by the fact you said, here you are, you spent the summer in Israel, you're coming back, going back to the United States, you're late for the plane. The green dress sticks out in my mind because you had the wrong attire for being, you had a mini dress and you're surrounded by guerrilla warfare. Let's talk about that. I mean, it sounds trite, but it's not. All the kind of, things that we take for granted sort of emerged as issues that were very different than one would think. So yeah.
Yeah, so that you're asking a big question, and yes, it was a terrifying experience. It wasn't initially. I was too naive, as many passengers were. As you said, it was the first international event of international terrorism, and we just didn't know what to expect. Certainly not, we knew nothing about hijackings and what they might. I thought they may want the plane. I won't go into what happened. I think the first thing that happened after they hijacked the plane was when they came once we landed in Jordan, and I saw the men outside the window, so many men in uniforms, in camouflage uniforms with guns around on their shoulders. That's when I sort of gasped and thought, oh my God, this is much more serious than I thought, and I don't understand what's going on. And then a few minutes later, when they told us to fill out some sort of normal cards, with your name and address and and some information about yourself and your nationality, and that they were going to collect our passports. Two people across the aisle from me, an Orthodox couple, took out 4 passports, 2 American and 2 Israeli, and proceeded to cut them up with her nail clipper, rip them up as much as they could, and swallow the identification pages of the Israeli passports. And I really had to turn to my neighbor, Bob, who really became my rock over the next days, and say, what's going on? And he explained to me that if the Palestinians found that they were Israeli citizens, they would be in very serious trouble. And so they had taken this extreme act, and there were people all over the plain who had dual citizenship doing the same thing, ripping up their passports and actually swallowing the ID pages with a little bit of water, just so they wouldn't be found, and then shoving the rest of it down between their seats. So we sat on that plane, Kathryn, for 6 days and 6 nights without, it was in the desert in September, extremely hot. We were not at any airport. We could not get off the planes except for when they wanted to go through the plane and see what we had in the overhead bins. So we actually sat there without running water, without flushing toilets, without air conditioning, with diminishing food, diminishing water, and a great deal of fear because we didn't know what was happening when the demands of the Palestinians to get their prisoners released from prisons largely in Israel.
So, in other words, it's very different than it would be today. There were no cell phones. You didn't know what
there
was
were
being happening in the outside world. But I think, as you said in the book, there was one woman who had a radio, I guess a Jordanian radio station she was listening to.
Yes.
Yeah. But one thing that it struck me when you're talking about them tearing up their passports, the Israeli passports, and yours is an American passport. But the question of, and I've been not in the hijacking situations, but situations in third world countries, and I was relating to all of that. It's
Hmm.
like when uh, the Palestinian um, captor, the people who were holding you captive, asked you whether you were Jewish or not, and you had to decide whether you were going to say yes or no. And sometimes the answer to those questions can be a live or die situation, and you don't really know what to say.
Hmm.
So yeah, and you decided. Tell us what you decided to say.
Well, yeah, I had thought about that before because I thought, how are they going to know who's Jewish and who's not? Because we realized that that's probably, that's who they wanted, particularly because they thought, they were looking for people who were Zionists, who were representative in their voices, representative of American imperialism, and America, that was the largest supporter of Israel and had in their minds really made them refugees in Jordan. And I did have that moment where it was possible for me to say, oh, I'm Christian or whatever, but in that moment, especially because I had just come from Israel and I think had just developed a more secular Jewish identity, and I felt that I didn't want to lie. And so I didn't. People, all my life, people said, "Oh, you're Jewish because I have red hair," They just didn't think I looked Jewish for whatever reason. A stereotype, which of course I
Yeah.
don't buy into. But I couldn't lie, and I think that's something we read about, from Holocaust survivors as well. That they didn't lie.
Yeah.
Because a certain level of pride in your religion. And I had actually grown up in a religious family.
But I think you also mentioned, though, that after this experience, you became less religious, maybe more
Yes,
secular in your beliefs. I should put it that
yeah,
way,
and
right?
yes, and I had become more secular by the time I was in high school, I had already adopted a more secular identity, and I stayed. It was more um, I developed, I think, once I was in Israel, and then I didn't want to give that up. So it was really a core identity moment, like who are you, and who would I be if I lied? Even though I was traveling alone, I didn't know anybody, on the plane, but in that moment, I made that decision.
Now, what about, and this was another, I thought, a very interesting part of the book because two of the young women who were part of the Palestinian organization that we're talking about came onto the plane and began talking to you and the other younger women, I guess, who were your age, and the one woman, Rachel, who was a translated, she knew Arabic, and how that changed your whole perspective about the Palestinians and the Israelis and the conflict. Um,
Yes. That wasn't actually, we were on the plane for 6 days and we slept on the plane for 6 nights. And then 31 of us were taken um, and held longer. We were held for another 2 weeks in Amman during the time when a violent civil war erupted in the region, in Amman itself. And so by that time, most people had been released. So when those Palestinian sisters came to talk to us, we were only 4 young women at that time and one older woman who wasn't with us when they talked to us. And so these Palestinian young women were about the same age as we were, and they were Palestinian. They were part of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the most radical group of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And they told us a different history. They talked very personally about how their families had been exiled from their land and what they had to leave behind, and how they had suffered for so many years without citizenship in Jordan, living in refugee camps and not having access to education or jobs or even the ability to make their lives better. So they were, of course, anxious to get back to the land that they had left, and their association with their trees was very strong, and their livelihoods. And that was a history I had never heard because, as I said, I grew up in a religious Jewish family in New York, and the story was very different. So I listened, I just wondered, because the story from the development of Israel, I had never heard this about what happened to the Palestinians, and I was young. I was 20 years old and just didn't know much about the history, even though I had, as often the case when we travel somewhere, we don't really know the history of the place in depth. And so it made me realize that I needed to listen, and I guess that was a part of me anyway, to listen and observe and realize that there's different sides of stories, there's different histories depending on who's telling it.
And fast forward, you became an anthropologist, right?
Yes.
Yeah, PhD and professor, as I read in the beginning. But the whole, I'm calling it a saga, a traumatic event. Another thing that you talk about in the book is the fact that the more fearful you became, and the more you realized that maybe nobody's even negotiating for us. Who knows? You had no idea that when that happened, it was like you couldn't lose it. You couldn't, if you started acting frightened or terrified, it would have an effect on the whole group, and that would the whole positive, I guess, attitude that the whole group was trying to maintain while they were being held captive. And you did that. You didn't act out the trauma.
Yeah, when you're in a group situation like that, there were 31 of us being held. There was continual bombing of the city, and even the house next door to where we were being held, in a very small place, tiny apartment for the 31 of us. The house next door was blown up, and we couldn't leave. We had guards, and we didn't want to be near the window. And when the house next door blew up, we realized that we could also die in any moment, and it was terribly frightening. And then there was, the times when it was a little more silent, when the bombing was in a different part of the city. But yes, we had to be strong because, as I write in the book, there's this sort of domino effect that I felt, that if one of us fell, we would all topple because we were so emotionally, I don't know what the word is, but we were just so dependent on each other. And we also relied on gallows humor. Because
how they would write your obituary, is that what you said? Or you started talking about what they would say in your obituaries?
Yeah, not the obituary, but how we would be flown home in coffins and covered with the American flag, and they would have a sort of procession for us with horses in Washington, D.C., and Nixon, and um, would be crying because he didn't do anything, who was the president at the time.
Yes.
He would be crying because he hadn't done anything to save us. And we would just go on with these ridiculous, um, you know, facts or visions of what would happen just to make light of the situation, which was so horrifying.
As reading your book and then comparing it to obviously the stories that you read about the Holocaust, the one thing I think that at least one of the things that stood out, they did feed you. You did get food, you did get water, albeit you weren't sure whether you were going to get cholera from the water. But
That's right.
yeah,
And the food was very meager. I mean, I lost 25 pounds in that period of time. So I probably did not focus a lot on that in my writing. But, the only thing we had while we were in that apartment in Amman was really the only, because they couldn't bring us food and the water had been turned off in the city. So we had uh, very little water, like maybe a quarter cup a day, and the only thing we could have were canned sardines. And I can tell you, Catherine, that for most of my life, I
you
never
never
ate a sardine
I
again.
don't blame you.
Yeah,
That was the end of the sardine.
that
um,
was. I had eaten enough. I
yeah,
mean, I didn't eat that many there either.
yeah.
But you can imagine, because that was a lot of, it was so stressful. I remember one day we shared a lemon with 31 of us. And actually, our guard, one of our guards who, we talked to him because he knew what was going on the streets, and we couldn't, of course, leave. We were hostages. But again, one woman who was with us could translate because she was a native Arabic speaker. And one day he went out to get us water, and he never came back. And we asked the next person who was guarding us, like, where is he? Where's Mohammed? And he had died just getting us water. So, those kind of things the death was so real. It was so close.
And then coming back, and maybe we don't have that long. We only have a few minutes left, but the transition from all of what we've been talking about, and there's a lot more, obviously, but and then coming back and making, staying at the Hilton Hotel in
In Cyprus and then
yeah, in
in
Cyprus,
Rome.
right? Yeah, it
Hmm.
was a
Yes, it was just a huge transition, and it was so rapid. And when we came home, we were inundated with calls, and at the airport, certainly when we got to Cyprus, which was our first stop, just so many um, newspaper reporters there, and we never knew that anyone even knew what was going on. We just thought, because it was so far before cell phones, we didn't have 24/7 news, and we just thought we were forgotten. And especially since now we had been taken to some apartment in the middle of the city, who would know where we were? So there was no one looking for us. But now that we suddenly, came to Cyprus, we met with President Nixon in Rome, and then we flew back to JFK, where we were just greeted by all these people, and again, the newspaper reporters and the cameras and all that. And then we were just supposed to go back to life as if nothing happened.
yeah.
And that just didn't work for me because something had happened.
And we haven't had a chance to talk about this, but this would be another interview. But the intergenerational trauma, because I did want to ask you, because you said your parents never spoke of, you didn't talk about bad things. This sort of swept under the rug with your own children.
Hmm.
uh, I'm assuming that you didn't talk to them about what happened to you either. Um,
Well, I did tell my children knew I'd been hijacked because that much they knew, but I never told them the story. I never told them what actually happened. They knew I'd been a hostage, but children can really read the room, and they never asked me for details. Of course, then when I moved towards writing the book, I started talking to them a little bit more, and of course they've both read it now. But no, they didn't know much at
So
all.
it's been a revelation for them too. So much more to ask you, but we have a minute left. I want give us website platforms we can go to for more information about the book, etc. And
Yes. Well, the book is available now. It's on Amazon and everywhere else you buy books. It's published by the University of Nebraska Press. You can get it there as well. I have my, I'm at Mimi Nichter, one word, miminichter.com is my website. And I'm on Facebook as mimi.nichter, Instagram at Mimi Nichter, and Threads at Mimi Nichter. So you can find me by my name. And the book is now, it's available. It was published just on Sunday and has been shipping out for a while. So please get it. And if you like it, please write a short review on
well,
Amazon.
it's a page turner. It really is. I mean, yeah, it's a
Thank you.
yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yep. Mimi Nichter, and the title of the book is Hostage, a Memoir of Terrorism, Trauma, and Resilience. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for interviewing me. It's been an honor, pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Kathryn.